the FBI is really an extra-constitutional agency. Its origins were sort of a ask for forgiveness, not permission, in Congress, backdated legislation to support this Bureau of Investigation. And if you look at the history of the FBI, it's never really been about protecting the Constitution. It's been about preserving status quo for whoever is in charge, whatever they deem to be what their desired outcome. And the Venn diagram may overlap with constitutional republicanism. So the FBI went after communists in the 40s and the 50s, and I think people would think that was an objectively good thing. But when the status quo of the rulers did not like what Martin Luther King was doing, the FBI went after him with COINTELPRO. And you combine that with this quota system, and you combine those two with this mission creep that has set in since September 11th, where this national security apparatus has been constructed via the Patriot Act, and the intelligence collection is now a paramount priority in the FBI versus just general law enforcement. The FBI is arguably now more of an intelligence agency than a law enforcement agency. And this isn't recent. This is something that people on the political left have been saying for decades, that the FBI was entrapping Muslim Americans into domestic terrorism plots with undercovers and with informants, and they were crimes that they were not predisposed to commit, and they were doing it to justify their existence. And now, because at the time you would say that's the Bush administration, they were going after perceived terrorists from radical Islam. Well, now your administration, by his words himself, by the president of the United States last September 1st in front of Independence Hall, he said that Republicans are anti-government extremism and white supremacy. Those are two of the top 4 priorities of the counterterrorism division of the FBI.
So what's the average person that you were sent, to investigate or talk to provide information back to the folks in DC? What were they like? Were they white supremacists? Were they, anti-government extremists? Tell us about that.
Well, most of the cases had already been interviewed and investigated by the time I was reassigned. There was very little work to do, which is a whole other concern, because we had these cases, they have to look active. We're waiting for marching orders that's taking years. So we would paper the file, we call it, and we would just go do unnecessary surveillance on somebody to say that we did something investigative.
Is part of the reason for that by keeping more people on these cases on the front end, they could justify an even higher level of financing for the Bureau on the back end, because they could say, hey, it took 4 people, not 3 to do this. And if we're going to keep doing this, we need the budget for 4 people, not 3 people. Was that part of the incentive?
Well, yeah. I mean, anytime they have the opportunity to keep cases on the books and make it look like there's an increased demand for manpower, nobody's ever going to say no to having more people available to work, more resources available. I think there's certainly an element to that, and from an administrative standpoint. And back to what I said with work smarter, not harder. You're able to keep these cases longer on the books open than you're able to check the boxes for multiple fiscal years. There's nothing that says, well, you have to have new case openings every year, but the existing cases can continue to be checking boxes for you. But back to your question on the people, the interviews that I conducted, that were not very many of them, but had a big impact on me. One was an anonymous tip from Rhode Island that said that a gentleman had engaged in violence on January 6th. The task force in DC did a facial recognition through his social media, and the surveillance cameras, negative. They did a geofence, a GPS on his phone, negative. So there was really nothing other than this anonymous tip. And I can tell you from being an experienced investigator, that's going to be a hard case to prosecute. Even if you go there and he confesses to committing crimes, he could be a crazy person. There's not even a complainant on this. But when I raised those concerns with the guys in my office, they said, we know, but if you don't go try to talk to him, Washington's just going to continue to tell you have to. So I drove over to this gentleman's house, knocked on his door, said, I'm with the FBI, we're investigating what happened at the Capitol. were you there that day? And he said, no, that was the day of my son's funeral. Now, he might have been lying to me, but regardless of that, that's collateral damage that the FBI is willing to put on the ordinary citizenry, making a gentleman relive the worst day of his life, arguably, in order to keep this dragnet alive on these cases. And that was one incident. The second one was an actually righteous, or you can argue righteous or not, but he was a subject who went to President Trump's speech. He walked over to the Capitol, went into the Capitol after asking the police for permission. We had video footage of him walking to the Capitol. He didn't commit any vandalism or any violence. He was in for a couple minutes and then left. Didn't take anything. We actually asked him if he took anything, and hoping to discover if he had maybe taken riot gear or something from the police. And he said, no, he took a free brochure. He was a dual citizen and he wanted to have it as a keepsake for his first visit to the Capitol. This was a gentleman who was in a lawyer's office, which is not free. He had lost his job. His medical license was at risk because he had walked into the people's house. And again, this is the process becoming the punishment. We couldn't even tell him if he was going to be charged with a crime because we were not the ones who were communicating with federal prosecutors on our own cases. And that to me is a problem that exists. There's a political element to it. There's a willingness on the FBI standpoint to view itself as the judge, jury, and executioner to a certain extent, which is not what the FBI is supposed to do. And it just was not in keeping with my oath of office, I felt. And certainly not in keeping with my training, which I received as every FBI employee receives. And this was something that when I eventually came forward, that I cited to all my levels of the chain of command. I said, look, we go to the Holocaust Memorial. We go to the MLK Memorial. It's a field trip that everybody does. And the purpose of the trip is to hammer home to all FBI employees that the Holocaust and civil rights abuses only occur when people just follow orders. When the police are willing participants, they become a political apparatchik for an out-of-control government. It is incumbent on you to throw the flag if you believe reasonably that we are off the rails. And I said, I see that. I see that from my point of view here with January 6th. And I see that as an extension from my involvement in a small capacity with the Gretchen Whitmer case, which I was on an operational capacity as a SWAT member on the arrest on those cases. And the scale sort of fell away from my eyes in the aftermath of that case when things played out in court, when it became pretty clear to me that those individuals were entrapped by the FBI. I went over to assist with the arrest of those guys, got a briefing where we were told that they were just as well trained and equipped and prepared to engage in a fight with us, a gunfight with the FBI. And they had sophisticated encrypted communication abilities, and that when we secured the structure that we were assigned to take, that we were going to have to wait and stand by and anticipate that they were going to come and start shooting at us like we were in a outpost in Afghanistan, which is not a typical briefing that you get in the FBI. It's normally just the location and the bad guy and a 30,000 foot view. But they actually had video of these guys and they described them as near peer, that they were just as well suited to engage in this gunfight, and that there was not a guarantee we were going to win. And obviously that was not accurate. And I felt that I was sort of, the wool was pulled over my eyes on that. Once shame on you, twice shame on me. And there's a lot of overlap with the way that the Michigan case played out and the way that we're seeing this January 6th case play out.
On the eve of you deciding to come and speak forward, as you were looking around in your field offices or other agents that you knew, do you get the sense that most agents agree with you? Do they not care? Are they with the nature of these political prosecutions? Paint a picture for me of what the cultural milieu inside the FBI is, especially at the agent level.
Well, at the agent level, I'm not in all the offices. I was in smaller offices. I felt that almost universally they shared my sentiment that what we're doing is wrong. It's certainly outside the rules, the way we're supposed to bring forward investigations and the politics behind it. Not everybody's a political animal. unfortunately, too many people are willing to just follow orders, or they're worried about their own career. And most disturbing to me with the just following orders standpoint, and this is the second part of my whistleblowing, because that we got into sort of the process issues that I had, but there was a risk to the public safety that I expressed. And again, I was a SWAT guy for 5 years, so I know that it's a legitimate law enforcement tool. But we were sending a large arrest operation, not SWAT, but multiple agents to go and arrest people for alleged misdemeanors. And we were sending SWAT for somebody who was a felony subject who had agreed to cooperate with us when we'd interviewed him a year and a half before. So I said, there's a huge gap in time. I think any reasonable person would think, well, they just must have declined to proceed forward. I mean, it's been 18 months. And we're going to send SWAT to his house. And I could articulate a reasonable concern that we could be putting his safety in risk. We could be putting our own safety at risk. If you knock on my door at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to do it very loudly if you're a SWAT team, that there's going to be a gun involved in that exchange, because I'm coming to the door armed. I have a Second Amendment right. I have an obligation as a husband and a father to make sure that everything is safe in my house. And if you're coming out of nowhere to me, that I would make that decision. And I don't think that I'm outside the bounds of being rational on it. And you could easily, to me, see a situation where that guy comes to the door armed because he doesn't know what the heck's going on. And all of a sudden you hear gun, 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 bang, 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 and you have a person get hurt. And I said, look, we Monday morning quarterback things like Ruby Ridge and Waco. It's Saturday. I'm here on Saturday. Game day's tomorrow. I'm telling you what you're doing is wrong. I'm telling you that we have alternative ways. The FBI should pride itself on bringing people into custody using the least amount of force necessary. We can call him on the phone. It's that simple. We can call his attorney. We can send a local deputy to knock on the door. We can do surveillance, which allegedly we're supposed to be doing on these cases. We're surveilling him, even though it was unnecessary. We know when he goes to work, where he goes to work. He stops to get gas and just swoop in and grab him then. Why are we going to his house with the SWAT team? And, if you want to take it even a step further, what if we go to a remote location in a rural community where there's a lot of people that are unhappy with the way the FBI is making the process the punishment, and they see a bearcat roll up on this guy's lawn, 12 agents, operators get out of the vehicle, and then the community says, not today, not my community, and now we're in real trouble. So there's a public safety element to it too that I brought forward, and I did that to my immediate supervisor. He referred me up the chain of command to the assistant special agents in charge of my division, expressed the same thing to them, and then eventually to the special agent in charge of my division. So 3 levels of management. And at each level, I was told that I had a great career and a great reputation. I had actually received an award about 6 weeks before this all happened. And they said, you're jeopardizing your career because of your behavior here, because you're questioning. And I said, I have training, I have an oath of office, and I feel that you are asking me, you're compelling me to violate my oath of office. And it's incumbent on me to come forward with that. I feel that I am doing my job. I'm not refusing to do my job. I feel that I'm doing my job. And they didn't share my sentiment, and they contrived a way to work around the Whistleblower Protection Act, which Congress implemented to protect people such as myself who come forward with a reasonable concern. You don't have to be right. You just have to be reasonable concern about waste, fraud, abuse, or risk of the public safety. And you have to come to the right authorities, your frontline supervisor being one of them. And they suspended my security clearance for other reasons, and within 30 days of me coming forward.
So that whistleblower process, I think the public doesn't really understand how it works. What were your expectations of how that might go going into it, and were those expectations met in terms of the protections that the system is theoretically supposed to afford people who are trying to inform the citizenry about wayward government institutions?
I almost accidentally fell into this. I was not really coming forward in my back of my head thinking, I'm going to become a whistleblower. I came forward to my boss, who I was on a first name basis with, and said, look, I think what we're doing is messing up. Can I do something else that day? I'm not comfortable with it. I was willing to do my job. We had a wiretap in my office, and I said, I'll sit on the wire, which is miserable. You sit there for 12 hours and wait for a phone to ring. And he said no. And I got annual training on whistleblowing. I knew that if I brought forward concerns to even that frontline supervisor, that is a protected activity. You're not supposed to face retaliation. And again, you don't have to be right. It's just reasonable. And I think even to you all, I've been pretty reasonable. I think that seems like something that should be taken up. They could take up my concern and say, Steve, you're wrong. Here's why. And I would have said, okay. Or they said, Steve, you're right. We're going to correct it. And I would have said, okay. And I would have gone back to work. But instead, what they've done is they found the hack in the FBI. Because of national security, you have to have a security clearance to work in the FBI. They suspended my clearance. And once that happens, you're still employed, but you can't work in an FBI space. You can't perform the duties of an FBI agent. So you're unpaid and you sit in this purgatory where they assess your security clearance or your ability to hold one if you're a threat to national security. And in getting familiar with this process with my attorneys who have handled this through the years, they've explained to me that it's essentially a wait you out game because they know financially most people aren't able to wait that long. And if I was in a little different situation, I'd sort of, when the COVID vaccine mandate came down and my family and I, we decided as a family we weren't going to get it, that I told my wife there might be a time that I might not be able to work for the FBI. So we had built up a reserve, a war chest to support it and sustain ourselves that we had. So I had a little bit longer runway than most people do. But you're unpaid. You still need their permission to work outside employment, but you can only earn up to $7,500 a year. And it's this game that they play. So in my case, it's laughable. They said that I refused to participate in these arrests. They actually told me not to come to work that day. They told me that I was AWOL. I was assigned to be absent without leave and docked a day's pay. So I followed orders and stayed home. They told me that I needed to participate in a security awareness briefing. And when they explained to me what it was sort of duplicative training that I'd already received. And I said, is this something to do with disciplinary action against me? And they said, well, you made different decisions than other people, so you're going to have to face the consequences. And that to me is pretty clear that it's disciplinary. And I asked if I could have an attorney, and they said, no. I said, well, can I have documentation that says I can't have an attorney, that I can take it to my attorney? And they said, okay. And then I never heard anything. I was suspended a few days later. So they told me I'm suspended for refusing to participate in that process, which I didn't really have a chance to do. And then finally, and I will plead guilty, I accessed improperly unclassified documents from the FBI. It was the employee handbook and guidance on disciplinary proceedings and the quarterly reports about disciplinary matters that get put out. And I took those as a rubric for what to expect as a precedent for what I was accused of doing. And my attorney asked me to get him anything that I could find about discipline within the FBI so he would know how to represent me. And I did that. They're all unclassified. They're all housed on a classified system though. So me taking those was a violation, which probably warranted a strongly worded email. But in my case, they suspended my security clearance for accessing the employee handbook improperly and walked me out of the building on September 19th of 2022.